Hey everyone, welcome back to my tiny garage workshop. So I've had this super cheap plane sitting on my shop for a while, and I've kept it because someday I knew I would want to use the iron to make some sort of wooden plane. So I found myself in need of a rabbet plane for an upcoming project, and thought now would be the perfect time to make a low-angle rabbet block plane based off Lie-Nielsen's number 60.5 rabbet block plane. So I drew up some plans, made the plane, cut the iron, and as you know from the title of the video, doesn't really work all that well. But here's the thing, I don't think it's totally ruined. I think it could maybe be redeemed, and that's part of why I wanted to still make this video. So here's what I'm kind of thinking about this video is, first I want to just kind of walk through the build and talk about a couple things I learned from the build. I hope by doing this it'll, maybe help some other people thinking about building a low angle block plane learn what not to do. Second, I want to basically crowdsource my problem to you guys and ask you what I think I should do to get this plane working. I know that there are a lot of smart people out there that probably know exactly what I need to do and figure out what I need to do to fix this whole project so it's not a complete waste. And so hopefully, even with all those things combined, added bonus is I hope the combination of my thoughts, your guys' comments will be a goldmine of information for anyone seeking to journey into their own plane making. So as you've seen so far, I based the length of the plane off an existing block plane I have. I squared all that up, and this is going to be the core part of the plane. So right here I'm cutting the bed angle of the plane at 15 degrees, which is roughly equivalent to the bed angle of the Lie-Nielsen plane I was basing my plane around. I knew I wouldn't be able to hand cut the exact angle off the saw, so I rough cut it as close as possible to my line, and then went in with the number 5 and planed down to my line. Don't show this in the video, but one thing I made sure to do was that the surface of the bed angle was flat, and most importantly, that it was square to the sides. Now what I'm doing here may not make sense until kind of an ending shot here, but the iron that I'm using didn't protrude far enough beyond the bed angle of the plane, and so I needed to cut this little notch. What this little notch is going to allow me to do is get in a hammer to be able to kind of laterally adjust the plane from side to side. It'll also allow me to tap the top of the iron so that I can advance the plane while I'm setting the plane up. Another thing I'll mention while I'm cutting out this notch is this is my first foray into plane making of this kind, and so I was kind of making things up as I went and hoping that it would work out in the end. With that notch done, here you can see kind of what I mean about having the iron extend beyond the bed angle that will allow me to kind of tap either side and the top to advance the blade. Now with the plane body done, I can move on to cutting out the sides. Once again, I used that same existing block plane I had to get the shape of the sides I wanted. So I transferred this shape to my wood using blue tape and a knife. I love using this blue tape that way because it makes a perfect contrast that's, to me, a lot easier to see, especially on darker woods. Plus, there's something pretty satisfying about pulling the blue tape off after you've kind of cut out the edges that you need. So the plane body is roughly ½ an inch thinner than the width of the iron I'm using, and that's going to leave each side roughly ¼ inch thick. So if you're unfamiliar with rabbet planes, they're different from standard planes in that the edge of the iron sits flush with the sides of the planes, whereas standard planes, the iron sits within the body of the plane. This is precisely the point of a rabbet plane in that it allows you to cut into the corners which a traditional plane cannot. So anyway, I made life easier on me by taping the side pieces together and cutting them out at the same time so I can guarantee the shape would be identical. You also notice I didn't exactly cut to the line, but I wasn't too worried about this because I was going for the general shape anyway. Once everything was cut, I used the file to smooth out the final shape. The whole time I was using the file, I kept thinking how much easier it would be if I had a spoke shave, which may be the next little tool I either make or purchase. With the sides shaped to how I wanted them, I could cut out a half circle using a 1-inch Forstner bit. The half circle not only allows the iron to extend out to sit flush with the sides, but it's important to give space for any shavings that may have a place to go. Then I bored a 1/4 inch hole slightly above the half circle where I'll place a rod through. This rod will give the wedge that I'm going to use something to wedge against. And here I got the first look at the overall final shape of the plane, which I was really happy about. At this point, I had the core components made and I could glue everything up. I used a piece of MDF and tried to ensure everything was sitting flush against it to try to make the sole of the plane as flat as possible. While that was all gluing together, I moved on to cutting the iron. Since I was using a traditional iron, I needed to make some adjustments so that it would fit in a rabbet plane. So what I did was I cut about a ½ inch off on either side of the iron, but stopped about 3/4 of an inch from the cutting edge of the iron. This wasn't my favorite time cutting metal, and I can't say it was my favorite. Probably didn't help that I was using an extremely dull old blade though that had a lot of teeth missing. But anyway, I persevered, was able to cut everything out, and then I took a file and cleaned up the edges so I wouldn't cut myself. So maybe you already noticed the first problem I ran into with my design. But with the iron I cut, I got all excited to see it within the plane, only to have a sinking realization there was no way for me to fit the iron into the plane. For a while I thought maybe the whole thing was ruined, but after I took some time away, thought about it, I realized I could widen the throat of the plane, which would allow me to slide the iron up into the plane from the bottom. So here I took my chisel and using the existing angle, just gradually pared down until the gap was wide enough for the iron to clear the rod and slide into place. I felt good about averting my first mistake, and so I pressed on to building the wedge. With the first problem averted, I could then move on to creating the wedge. I conveniently was able to use the other half of the plane body that I cut at the beginning. Then after it was cut a little bit shorter, I could take it to the shooting board and add a slight angle on the front of the wedge. With that done, I could flatten out the top of the wedge. Once I did that, I put it in and noticed that the wedge was not sitting perfectly square against the rod. So I had to make some more modifications to the wedge in order for it to sit flush against the wedge. Finally, when I was building everything, I purposely left the plane a touch wider than I needed, so that once everything was done, I could plane down the sides to get the sides and the whole width of the plane to the exact thickness of the iron. Once again, this is important so that the iron sticks out just slightly so that it can get into those corners when you're planing. Then it was on to sharpening the iron, which leads to the next reason why I don't think this plane functions very well. First of all, I know this is a super cheap plane, and therefore I'm guessing it isn't the highest quality metal. And it had gotten rusted and gotten very pitted at the cutting edge. This all led to lots of time trying to flatten the back of the plane iron. And no kidding, I spent about 3 hours working on getting the back flat, and I still didn't get it fully flattened, which is why I don't think it works at all. But I was so tired of flattening it that I just wanted to move on. And I was probably wrong in doing that, and I probably do need to flatten the back. But anyway, I decided to press on nonetheless and see if I could get this thing working. So with the blade slightly sharp, I set everything up and got all excited to try it out for the first time, only to find that the wedge wasn't providing enough pressure to keep the iron secure. The whole thing just ended up becoming loose and not cutting a thing, and the blade even went so far as to fall out. This was my second realization that I had done something wrong, and that was that I needed some sort of stop that would prevent the blade from being pushed back while I was trying to cut, and would instead have something that would force it to engage with the wood and actually cut something. My remedy to this problem was an idea to drill a hole that would allow me to hammer down an angled peg that would hopefully keep the iron securely in place. Fortunately, however, this still didn't really give me good results, and the blade would also kind of twist because the force of the peg wasn't fully across the whole back of the iron, so it would kind of just pivot instead on the peg. Much to my disappointment, this didn't really help, and furthermore didn't allow the plane to start getting nice full-length shaving cuts, which ultimately kind of left me just discouraged, and I kind of was ready to just move on, so that's kind of where I just left everything. So I know I left off feeling pretty discouraged, but after shooting that last shot that you saw, which I actually did after the voiceover, I don't think I'm as discouraged as I made myself sound. I actually think I'm pretty hopeful for this. I noticed when I was shooting that last scene that along the portions of the iron that are actually flat and sharp, it was able to cut. And where it wasn't cutting was where the plain iron was nicked and not flat but pitted along the back. So first thing I learned is just have sharp irons. I don't know what I was thinking that I'd be able to not have an iron that's fully flat, fully sharp, and have the plain iron work. I was just trying to avoid more work, and that's never going to lead to anything good. So sharpen your irons. Two other things that I wanted to just kind of summarize. One, to get your help with, I guess both two, is if you're going to make a rabbet plane where the plain iron is extending the full width of the plane body, consider how you're going to get the iron into the body of the plane. And as you saw, that was one of the problems I had, and I remedied that by opening up the throat and allowing me to slide it in from the bottom. If I didn't have this rod here, I wouldn't have needed to open the throat as much as I did. And that kind of leads into the second thing, is consider how you're going to secure the iron in place. I tried to use this wedging mechanism. I think because it was low angle, the wedge was able to keep it kind of from coming up, but it didn't give that force from the back while cutting that the iron needs. Without it, as you saw, it just became loose, and so I needed some sort of backward pressure on this iron that wasn't being provided by this wedge alone to keep it in place and to actually cut. So those are the two things I would consider anybody thinking about making a rabbet block plane. Is one, how are you going to get the plain iron in place, and two, how are you going to secure it. And on point two, that's something I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on, is how can I kind of update this even to give the iron, to secure the iron more in place. One thing I saw someone do was they put a threaded insert into the plane, and then they had a wedge with a screw on it, and that allowed them to kind of really secure and fasten it in place pretty strongly. It's something I might consider doing, but once again, I would love to just hear what you guys think. So thank you so much for watching. This was a lot of fun to make. I'm going to be making more planes in the future, and if you liked the video, consider giving it a like. That really does help this video out. It helps me out. And if you think this video earned it, please consider subscribing. If you like what you saw, if you want to be notified about more of the videos I make as I journey into this world of hand tool woodworking and beyond, subscribe. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.